The sterile air of the conference room presses in, heavy and cold. It smells of expensive wood polish and betrayal. Across the table, his face is a mask of forced authority, the kind he wears now for strangers, for shareholders, for her replacement. Beside him, she sits perfectly still, a porcelain doll with calculating eyes, already wearing the confidence of someone who believes they've won. My lawyer sits next to me, a silent anchor, his expression neutral, betraying nothing of the storm brewing beneath the surface. He clears his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. As you know, he begins, his voice steady, condescending, this has been difficult for everyone difficult. He thinks this word encompasses the slow, agonizing death of a marriage, the theft of a future, the systematic dismantling of everything I built. It does not. My hands are clasped tightly in my lap, knuckles white. I focus on the rich grain of the conference table, tracing a pattern only I can see. I feel the weight of years pressing down, the sleepless nights building this company from a desperate idea scribbled on a napkin, the sacrifices, the shared dreams that now taste like ash. All leading to this moment, where the man I loved, the man who stood beside me through every struggle, prepares to deliver the final blow. He looks at me, and there is no recognition, no trace of the boy who promised forever. Just the cold, vacant eyes of a predator. He picks up a document. This is it. The termination papers. The official severance. From my company. Our company. The air grows thinner. My breath catches in my throat, not from fear, but from the sheer, dizzying height of the precipice we stand on. They think I am here to beg, to negotiate a severance package, perhaps shed a few convenient tears. They think I am broken. They are wrong. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. It started quietly, as most poisons do. A subtle shift in temperature. A missed call explained away with a plausible lie. A new scent on his clothes, not perfume, but something chemical, sharp, like ambition mixed with cheap floral. At first, I dismissed it. Marriage, especially one tangled with a demanding business, has its rhythms, its ebbs and flows. There are seasons of closeness, seasons of distance. This felt like distance. We built this company from nothing. Literally nothing. 2 laptops on a wobbly kitchen table, fueled by instant coffee and a shared belief that we could carve out something real in the world. He had the vision, the grand ideas, the ability to charm investors. I had the structure, the grit, the relentless focus on the details, the processes, the doing. I took his brilliant chaos and molded it into something functional, profitable. I was the engine, he was the architect. Together, we were unstoppable. We built it brick by brick, late nights bleeding into early mornings, celebrating small victories with cheap champagne, holding each other when deals fell through. This wasn't just a company. It was our third child, born of shared passion and backbreaking work. He was my best friend, my confidant, the person I couldn't imagine navigating the world without. We understood each other on a level that transcended words. Or so I thought. The distance grew. Work became an excuse. He stayed late, traveled more. When he was home, his eyes were often elsewhere, lost in a thought he didn't share. The easy laughter we once shared became strained, conversations functional rather than intimate. The bed felt vast and empty between us. I told myself it was stress. The company was growing fast, demands were high. I doubled down, working harder, trying to ease his burden, hoping that once the pressure subsided, we would find our way back to each other. Then came the new executive assistant. Young, bright, fresh out of business school. Her resume was impressive, her eagerness palpable. Her name was Clara. He interviewed her himself, which was unusual. He said she had a spark. A few weeks in, he started singing her praises. She was indispensable. She anticipated his needs. She worked as late as he did. My stomach twisted, a knot of something cold and unpleasant. It wasn't jealousy, not yet. It was instinct. a primal alarm bell ringing in the quiet corners of my mind. I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid, insecure. We were partners. In life, in business. He wouldn't. Not him. Not us. But the signs became harder to ignore. The lingering looks. The hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. The way he defended her with an intensity that was disproportionate to the situation. My colleagues noticed too. Subtle glances, awkward silences when I joined a group. The air in the office shifted, becoming charged with unspoken secrets. I started working later too, not just out of dedication but to see, to observe. I saw them laughing together, a comfortable intimacy that felt like a violation. I saw his hand linger on her arm a moment too long. I saw the way she looked at him, a look I once reserved for him alone. The knot in my stomach tightened, twisting into something sharp and agonizing. One evening, pretending to have forgotten my laptop, I returned to the office after hours. The lights were dim. The only sound was the hum of the servers and the distant traffic from the street below. I walked towards his office, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The door was slightly ajar. I heard voices. Hers. His. Low. Intimate, unmistakable. My hand froze on the doorknob. I couldn't breathe. I stood there, rooted to the spot, listening as my world shattered into a million irreparable pieces. It wasn't just flirting. It was planning. Talking about their future. Their future. A future that explicitly excluded me. They spoke about the company, about her role growing, about how my position was redundant, a relic of the past. They laughed about how easy it would be, how I was so focused on the operational details, so trusting, I wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The laughter was the worst part. The sound of my life being dismantled, laughed at, by the two people closest to the center of it. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. I simply turned, walked silently back out, retrieved my laptop from my office, and left the building. The cold night air hit me like a physical blow. I drove home on autopilot, tears streaming down my face, blurring the city lights into streaks of painful color. The house felt empty, haunted by the ghosts of promises made and broken. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the silence amplifying the echo of their voices, their laughter. The pain was a raw wound, but beneath it, something else began to stir. Cold. Hard. A resolve I didn't know I possessed. They underestimated me. They saw my trust as naivety, my dedication as blind loyalty. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just dissolve. They were wrong. The next morning, I woke up and the world had fundamentally changed. The air was different. The light was different. I was different. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but it was no longer debilitating. It was fuel. I looked at my reflection, at the red-rimmed eyes, the strained face. This was the last time I would look like a victim. I went to the office. I put on my work face, the professional mask I had honed over years. I smiled. I participated in meetings. I interacted with him, with her. Every interaction was a performance, a carefully calibrated lie. I watched them, now with a different set of eyes. I saw the conspiratorial glances, the private jokes, the subtle power plays. I saw the future they were building on the ruins of my past. I started gathering information. Quietly. Methodically. Financial records. Email trails. Meeting notes. Anything that documented my contributions, my ownership stake, the history of the company. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, only that I needed evidence. Evidence of my worth. Evidence of their plot. I also pulled out the prenup. We had signed it years ago, at the insistence of his family's financial advisor. At the time, it felt like a formality, a piece of paper that had no bearing on our deep connection. We barely read it. Now I read every word, every clause. My lawyer had been present during the signing, a kind, quiet man named David. He had advised me then, ensuring my interests were protected, even though I thought it was unnecessary. I found the relevant clause. The one I had barely registered, signing it away in the haze of wedding planning and young love. A clause that stipulated that in the event of a divorce initiated due to infidelity on his part, my ownership stake in the company, accumulated during the marriage, would revert solely to me. 100%. Not his portion, not just mine. The entire ownership accumulated from the day we said, "I do." It was a standard clause, David had explained at the time, meant to protect assets in case of a messy split caused by misconduct. We had laughed about it, never imagining it would apply to us, to our company. Reading it now, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from a surging wave of cold power. 100%. It wasn't just about divorce anymore. It was about the company. My company. They wanted to push me out, take what I built, install her in my place. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. Oh, they had no idea. The next few weeks were the most surreal of my life. I played the role of the oblivious wife, the hardworking partner. I endured his strained attempts at normalcy, his transparent lies. I watched Clara subtly assert herself, taking on more responsibility, her confidence growing with each passing day. They were positioning her, undermining me. In meetings, my suggestions were dismissed, my expertise questioned. He would defer to Clara, asking for her input, praising her insights, even on areas I had built from the ground up. Colleagues who were once allies now avoided my gaze, caught between loyalty and the shifting power dynamics. The emotional toll was immense. Every smile was a lie, every conversation a performance. I felt like an actress trapped in a terrible play, watching my own life unfold as a tragedy, unable to scream, unable to stop it. But beneath the performance, the core of me hardened. I was a steel rod wrapped in velvet. I kept gathering information, documenting everything. His absences, her increased presence, the new reporting structures that bypassed me, the thinly veiled attempts to marginalize my role. I sent everything to David. He worked silently preparing. They started building a case against me. Subtle criticisms and performance reviews that had previously been glowing. Questions about my dedication, my focus. They were creating a narrative. I was no longer essential, no longer capable. It was a slow, insidious poisoning of the well. It hurt more than the affair itself, this calculated attempt to erase my contribution, to paint me as obsolete in the very world I helped create. He proposed a restructuring. My role would be eliminated, folded into other departments. A new position, reporting directly to him, would be created for Clara, essentially my job, rebranded and handed to her. He presented it as a necessary step for the company's growth. His eyes avoided mine as he explained it, talking about synergy and efficiency. It was a knife twisted slowly in the gut. I nodded, my face carefully blank. I asked questions, played the part of the concerned, slightly bewildered executive. I didn't argue. I didn't fight back. Not yet. Every non-reaction was a carefully placed stone in the path leading to their downfall. They interpreted my silence as acceptance, my compliance as defeat. They believed they were winning. The tension in the office became unbearable. Every glance felt loaded, every conversation layered with subtext. I felt isolated, surrounded by people who either knew and were complicit, or knew and were too afraid to act, or were simply oblivious to the quiet war being waged around them. Clara walked around with an air of triumph, a confident smirk playing on her lips. She was already acting like she owned the place. In her mind, she did. He scheduled the meeting. The formal dismissal. He called it a transition discussion. He said it was time to finalize the terms of my departure. He wanted it clean, quiet. He offered a severance package. Generous, he called it. A pittance compared to what he planned to take. I agreed to the meeting. I even suggested a date. I was calm. Too calm. My colleagues saw the meeting invite on his calendar. The whispers intensified. The pity in their eyes was almost as hard to bear as the contempt in his. They thought my story was over. They sent the proposed severance agreement. I read it. It was humiliating. It offered me a fraction of my value, tied to non-compete clauses and gag orders. It was designed to silence me, to bury my story, to allow them to move forward without a ripple. I forwarded it to David. He replied with a single word, "Good." The day of the meeting arrived. I woke up feeling strangely detached. This wasn't just a business negotiation. It was the culmination of a war waged in silence and shadows. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that conveyed strength, not vulnerability. I looked in the mirror, and the woman looking back was a stranger. Eyes cold, mouth set in a determined line. The pain was a distant echo now, replaced by a fierce, burning clarity. David met me at the office. He was calm, reassuring. He carried a single briefcase. We walked to the conference room. He was already there, seated with Clara, a lawyer I didn't recognize, and the HR representative. They looked smug, confident. They expected this to be a formality, a signing ceremony. He started talking about the company's future, about my transition, about the severance. His voice droned on, a rehearsed speech filled with corporate platitudes. I watched his face, searching for any trace of the man I married. There was none. Just this hollow shell, consumed by ambition and deceit. Clara sat beside him, her eyes fixed on me, a triumphant glint in them. She looked like a cat who had swallowed the canary. When he finished, he slid the severance agreement across the table. "We believe this is fair," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It reflects your years of service." David cleared his throat. His voice was quiet, steady. "Thank you," he said to my husband. "We have reviewed your proposal." He paused, the silence stretching, taut with anticipation. The confident smiles on their faces wavered slightly. "However," David continued, his voice gaining a quiet strength, "my client will not be signing this document." My husband's eyes narrowed slightly. Clara shifted in her seat. "Not signing," he repeated, a hint of impatience in his tone. "This is a standard agreement. It's more than generous." "Generosity is subjective," David replied smoothly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document. Not a thick stack like the severance agreement, but a single-bound document. The prenup. "We believe the terms of the prenuptial agreement between my client and yourself are far more relevant in this context." My husband's face hardened. "The prenup? What does that have to do with anything?" "This is about her employment. This is about the dissolution of a partnership," David corrected him gently. "A partnership in marriage and a partnership in business, intricately linked." He opened the prenup to a specific page and laid it on the table. "Specifically, we refer to Article 5, Section B." He began to read, his voice slow and deliberate. "In the event that the dissolution of the marriage is sought by either party based upon grounds of infidelity committed by husband," he paused, letting the words hang in the air. My husband's face began to pale. Clara's smug expression vanished, replaced by a look of confusion, then dawning horror. "Then, notwithstanding any other provision contained herein or in any other agreement between the parties, wife shall be entitled to, and husband shall immediately transfer to wife, all of husband's right, title, and interest in and to any and all business entities, assets, or property acquired or significantly appreciated during the marriage, including but not limited to." David looked directly at my husband now, his gaze unwavering, the entirety of his ownership stake in company name. The silence that followed was deafening. My husband stared at the document, then at David, then at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Clara looked like she might faint. Their lawyer, who had been lounging back in his chair, suddenly sat bolt upright. That's not right," my husband stammered, his voice trembling. "That clause. I don't remember that. That's not what it says." "It is precisely what it says," David stated calmly, tapping the page. "It was drafted, reviewed, and signed by both parties, with legal counsel present for each. We have the original signed copy here." "But infidelity." My husband sputtered, scrambling for footing. "How is that relevant to her employment?" "As we understand it," David said, his tone sharpening slightly, "your intention to terminate my client's employment, coupled with the apparent relationship between yourself and Miss Clara," he gestured towards her with a slight nod, constitutes actions directly leading to the irretrievable breakdown of the marriage initiated, in effect, by your misconduct. Furthermore, it demonstrates a clear intent to replace my client in the company she co-founded and significantly built, effectively transferring her value to another party as a consequence of that infidelity.
No.
That's a stretch, my husband shouted, his composure cracking. You can't connect her firing to my personal life. The timing, the circumstances, the elevation of Ms. Clara to my client's role, David listed, his voice like ice. The evidence is compelling. We are prepared to argue, very convincingly, that your actions meet the criteria for infidelity leading to dissolution, as defined by this agreement. He gestured to the prenup, which, as you can see, has rather significant consequences for your ownership stake. My husband was breathing heavily, his face now blotchy red. He looked between David, the document, and me, his eyes wild. He finally understood. The trap he had carefully laid for me had sprung shut, ensnaring him instead. He thought he was taking my job, maybe offering a small settlement. He was actually handing over his entire ownership of the company. 100%, he whispered, the bravado completely gone. You mean everything? Everything accumulated during the marriage, David confirmed, which, as you know, constitutes the vast majority of the company's value.
But
we built this together, he yelled, slamming his hand on the table. Clara flinched. The HR person looked like they wanted to vanish. This is my company. My voice was quiet, level, cutting through his rising panic. No, I said, looking him dead in the eye. It was ours. You chose to make it mine. He surged to his feet, knocking his chair back. It clattered loudly against the wall. You planned this, he roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. You set this up. You let me do all the work and then you pull this? You conniving. Calculating. I met his gaze without flinching. You planned to fire me, I said softly. You planned to take my contribution, my sweat, my loyalty, and give it to her. I glanced at Clara, who looked utterly terrified, watching her carefully constructed future crumble before her eyes. You poisoned my home, and you poisoned my company. All I did, I continued, my voice gaining strength, was remember the agreement we made. An agreement you signed. But I'm the CEO. I'm the face of the company. I handle the investors. You can't run it without me, he pleaded, desperation replacing rage. That, I said, a cold, sharp satisfaction piercing through the years of pain, is no longer your concern. David stood up. He gathered the prenup and placed it back in his briefcase. We will proceed with filing for divorce immediately, he said, addressing my husband's lawyer, who looked utterly shell-shocked. The terms of the prenuptial agreement regarding asset distribution will be enforced. My husband stood there, frozen, his mouth slightly open. The color had drained from his face again, leaving him a sickly gray. He looked at me, not with anger anymore, but with a dawning, gut-wrenching understanding of the magnitude of his mistake. He had been so blinded by arrogance, so certain of his power, that he had forgotten the foundational contract of our life together. He had gambled everything on my presumed weakness and lost spectacularly. You, he choked out, pointing at me again, the finger still trembling. You can't. You'll ruin it. You'll ruin everything. On the contrary, I said, rising from my seat, my legs surprisingly steady. I'm saving it. From you. I didn't say another word. I simply turned and walked towards the door. David followed, leaving him standing there, screaming my name, screaming about lawyers, about ruin, about how unfair this was. His voice echoed in the hallway, a pathetic, impotent sound. Clara remained seated, silent tears streaming down her face. The HR rep was frantically trying to pretend he didn't exist. I walked out of that building, the weight of years lifted from my shoulders, replaced by the heavy, exhilarating burden of my own future. The air outside felt clean, cold, and sharp. I was free. And I had my company back. The aftermath wasn't immediate or easy, but it was swift in its inevitability. His lawyer scrambled, threatened, postured. David remained calm, presenting the ironclad document, the clear evidence of infidelity. Turns out his and Clara's email exchanges were rather enthusiastic about their future plans, including how they would manage the company once I was gone, and the unambiguous clause. There was no defense. He fought, of course. Tried to tie it up in court, to argue duress, manipulation, anything.
But the prenup was solid.
My foresight, dismissed as unnecessary formality years ago, was my shield and my sword. The judge saw it for what it was, a binding contract, triggered by his own actions. Within months, it was finalized. The company became mine. 100%. He was out. Not just as CEO, but as an owner and employee, a presence.
Gone.
Clara left too, quietly. Her dreams of executive power evaporated into the harsh reality of her complicity. Taking the reins felt surreal. It was my company again, but it was also changed. Marked. The sterile conference room where he delivered his planned execution became my office. I sat at the head of the table, looking out at the city, and the silence was no longer oppressive, but full of potential. The victory was complete, undeniable. I won the company. I won my financial independence. I won back control of my professional life. But it wasn't the triumphant, unadulterated joy I might have expected.
It was
Quiet.
bittersweet.
The man I loved had tried to destroy me, and in stopping him, I had to tear down the shared world we built. The company, the home, the future, all irrevocably altered. The company thrives. I am the CEO now, leading with a different kind of strength, one forged in fire and betrayal. I value loyalty, integrity, and hard work above all else. The air in the office is lighter now, free of the tension, the secrets. We are building something new, something truly mine, built on solid ground, not on deception. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in the quiet house that used to echo with shared laughter, I think about him. About the boy I fell in love with, before the ambition consumed him, before he lost his way. I wonder if he ever understands the depth of what he lost. It wasn't just a company or a marriage. It was trust. It was the person who saw the best in him, who stood by him, who built his dreams alongside her own. Winning felt like surviving, like reclaiming a stolen piece of myself. The pain is still there, a scar, a reminder. But it no longer dictates my steps. I walk forward, into the future, 100% my own. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.